all the other economists and all the other advisors, and then he makes that decision and says, I've heard everybody, but I think that looking at all the data you have given me, and remember earlier in the week I told you that we're starting a series of assessments. Looking at all the data you have given me and looking at the forecast, I want you to start engaging the fund now. Because, yes, I agree that the fund is not a single bullet to answer all the questions that we have. But if they can come in and support the program that you have put on the table, because at the end of the day, it was a two-pronged decision. You either execute your own enhanced economic program by yourself, or you do it with the fund. And in the end, the president made that decision, and we've started putting in place
if I understand you,
mechanisms.
there were different views expressed.
As expected, yeah.
But it was the president's decision.
Yes, supported by cabinet. So in the
as
end,
a collective.
Yes, so in the end, when the president calls the shot, cabinet has an opportunity to disagree with him, or to affirm the position and the arguments that he has, summed up. And in the end, president makes decision, cabinet supports that decision. So you notice that the statement conveyed all three. The president has decided, has authorized the finance minister, cabinet has supported that decision. We move.
The Herald reports today that the vice president was not in favor and is not being part of the sensitive economic decisions being taken. We know the vice president by convention is the head of the economic management team. And in fact, when IMF teams come into the country, they will typically meet a vice president as well.
Yeah.
So is this correct?
It's a collective decision. People may express different views before or during, but in the end, when that decision is made, I have not heard anybody extricate himself from it and say that I am not part of this.
But in terms of the finance minister leading the delegation, if you listen to him carefully in February, he said the consequences are dire.
Yeah.
So it's not even appear, it is quite clear that he deeply resents having to go and meet the IMF.
Because, well, not having to go to meet the IMF, but having to go to the IMF for a balance of payment program. Because I think we must distinguish the fact that we are members of the fund. In fact, just last year, we took $1 billion from the fund.
Yes.
So it's not about going to meet the fund generally. It's about going for
a balance of payment program. Yes.
Okay. Now, a BOP program comes with some conditionalities.
Yeah.
And a lot of finance ministers all over the world, or in places where finance ministers are just managing the treasury, the ministers for the economy will tell you that whenever you go for these programs that come with conditionalities, they limit your ability to spend on what you consider as your own priorities. And therefore, you find a lot of finance ministers not being in support of that. But when you look at all the data as available to us now and the constraints that we find ourselves in, the fund being requested to come in to support our bigger program is the way to go. And that's why, despite anybody's personal initial views, when the boss calls the shot and gives the instructions, we go.
But the man who sits at the top of the economic decision making by the president is the Minister of Finance. And I said, and I the points he made were not his personal views, because this was official engagement on the e-levy.
Yeah.
And based on the data available to him, he says, we will not go to the IMF for BOP support. The consequences are dire. We have the capacity.
Yeah.
We are proud people. We can do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Based on all the information available to him.
Yeah.
And as late as a week to this announcement, this was still the position.
Yeah, so three things. Actually, the man who sits at the top of economic policy is the president. He takes ultimate responsibility for it. Management on a day-to-day basis, the vice president and the EMT will handle it. Fiscal policy, in particular, income, expenditure, debt management sits with the finance minister. Secondly, the finance minister went on to say in Tamale that, and all that you've said is true, then he says, if only we can speak that one language and burden share. What have been the facts in our effort to get that one language and burden sharing? The facts are that the domestic program that he rolled out in 2021, which was aimed at ensuring that we are able to do this on our own, that domestic program has suffered a number of challenges. And as you look at the challenges that the domestic program has suffered, and you look at the pressures that are continuously building, the man who takes the ultimate responsibilities of the view that, listen, we cannot wait. You need to start talking to the fund. Let's open a window so that with this broad program that you've put out there, even if your domestic resources are gradually ramping up and they are not there yet. We are not caught wanting by the time some of our obligations are due.
But in respect of the balance of payment program being pitched as an alternative to the e-levy, that's the question we had, which I think is correct, because apart from the minister, other senior, the GRA board chairman, Professor Ade, also said, why go to the IMF for peanuts when you have e-levy that you can raise a lot of money?
That's correct.
So now that we have decided to go for a BOP with the IMF, does that mean that the e-levy gets
off the table?
Off the table.
So two things. Whenever you introduce a revenue measure, it takes a while for it to hit its optimal level. More so with the e-levy, where right from day one, you acknowledge that you have loopholes that need to be plugged from about the 1st of July. I think that was a clear announcement that was made right from the very beginning. So you were not expecting that it was going to ramp up everything that was due in the shortest possible time. Number two, e-levy has been heavily bastardized right from the very beginning. So a lot of people are finding ways of also evading it. You put all of those together, and though on paper you are confident that this is a good instrument, like Professor Adai said, to mobilize the domestic resources, you put all of that together. And the reality is that you are not, in these first 2 months, getting as much as you desire. You're going to have to give it room to get to optimal level. You're going to have to plug some of the loopholes which the GRA has started working on so that you can get the full value of what you are looking for. But you cannot wait that until you have that done, you are closing all other windows, because there are pressures and expectations that are building. We have obligations down the line, and we need to prepare for it. Treasury managers will tell you that if you are, let's say, due to retire a bond or retire a payment on a particular day, you don't wait for that day before you start mobilizing resources to go pay. You start building the necessary buffers and reserves so that by the time it's due, you're able to pay. We have a lot of external debt obligations which have escalated because of the depreciation of the cedi. Some of them are in large single bullets, and you cannot say that while you are waiting for e-levy to hit optimal, you won't take any other options available. By the way, at the same time, the international capital markets option, which is part of our program, is working. We've currently put $1 billion before Parliament to approve and accept, so that we're able to build up those reserves, those buffers, so that we are not found wanting by the time some of our obligations are due.
But 2 points there. Yeah. So the fact that tax policy takes a while to get to optimal level is known to everybody.
True.
Which is why it was either misguided or irresponsible to pitch the e-levy against the IMF. Because the point you just made is not a new discovery. We all know that when you come up with a tax policy, it will take a while for it to get to optimal. We've done only two or 3 months. So to go around the country telling people that if you pay e-levy, you won't go to IMF, and try and appeal to our pride as a people, and then come back and say, well, we didn't get what we said we'll get from e-levy, therefore we are going to IMF, either questions the judgment of the person or his honesty.
So go back. Why did those, may I say, town hall meetings even become escalated at a point? Because 4 months after this theory was supposed to come into practice, it was still hanging because of some of the scenarios that were happening in Parliament. You remember that in this country, you put fiscal policy and economic policy and monetary policy before Parliament by November. And you would expect it to be passed by November, December. Why? So that it can begin to pick up and hit optimal levels by the time you are getting to the end of first quarter, etc. E-levy was a scenario in which you put it before Parliament in November. It took about 4 months down the line for it to be passed, and then for you to now get the, because it's now been passed and you are sure it's going to happen, for you to now start putting in place the systems, and then you still had the loopholes that you projected that you will fix by the 1st of July. So it's been the exception, not the norm. Number two, even after it was passed and it is gradually making its way up the ladder, the window available to us, which would have ordinarily ensured that we don't find ourselves here, literally has been closed, if not just limited. And I'm talking about the capital markets window, which would have given you an opportunity to have some liquidity and ensure, therefore, that you will still be able to rely on your domestic, strategy, has been closed. And it's been closed for 2 reasons. One, we've been downgraded. 2, the kind of obstruction we are facing when it comes to getting fiscal policy passed or tax policy or revenue policy through is unprecedented. Even today, the $1 billion part of the domestic program, which we put in the budget, put before Parliament, got approval for, that is before Parliament today. We are being told that it will not be approved. If that is not approved, even your domestic answers, you forget about IMF, even your domestic answers to on your own go to the capital markets and raise $1 billion to shore up currency, avoid further depreciation of the CD, meet your international obligations, is significantly hampered. And so these are the challenges for which reason the president hears everybody and says, yeah, I've heard you. It's not about your honesty or dishonesty. I've heard you, but I want you to open that window.
You yourself, on the point of view, said that you yourself did that equivalence. So just to point out to listeners that it was not only Professor Ade and co. It was actually you yourself said that if we pay e-levy, we won't go for IMF. So I wanted to play something you said on a different radio station.
Please
this
do.
is on Asempa FM.
Please do.
And this, it was a while back.
Report, you know. And in that Moody's report, you know, they seem to put a whole lot of premium on the IMF, you know, and the discipline that comes with it. I answer it meet all the benchmarks are free and whole benefit now is here. That's a fair point. With that, wouldn't you probably credit the administration to take a decision to go to IMF?
Administration now or read money card don't pay now or do money koja IMF no. So what should we credit him with? Or read money card don't pay now if you're the echo IMF no.
Well, that is what Moody's.
But why do you have to in the first place who bury money card don't pay now if you are okay, but me read card don't pay me do IMF into clap for me for taking you to the IMF. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
So that was Asempa FM, and for those of you who don't understand, he basically was. What's the name of the guy? Obi was asking Kojo whether the previous administration should be credited for the macro stability at the time.
No. Please play it again. He says whether the previous administration should be credited for going to the fund.
No. He says because the report said that it was going to the fund that brought the macro stability.
That's
and then you said the administration that quote unquote chewed the bones,
chewed the meat down to the bone.
Why should we credit them for going to the IMF?
No, I said, what should we credit them for? Is it the chewing of the meat down to the bone, or is it the going to the fund to cure the chewing of the meat down to the bone? If you go back to the question that he asked me, he read the Moody's report, and he said, the Moody's report says that going to the fund brought stability. Should we not credit the NDC for going to the fund? And I said, well, going to the fund is not just going to the fund. You go to the fund because of something. The NDC went to the fund because, in their own words, they chewed the meat down to the bone. Those were the words of President Mahama at the time. These are not my words.
That he or we?
Well, you can play back his words.
That he said he chewed the bones?
He did. You can play back his words. He said that the meat has been chewed down to the bones. Those are not my words. Those are his. So now when you have... This is President Mahama.
No, I'm saying that if you are you quoting properly? Let's stick to what we have.
No. Okay. We are going back to exactly that audio. He says that the meat has been chewed down to the bone.
Okay.
And that as a result, they have to go to the fund for support. And so when you come back and you say that the NDC should be credited for going to the fund for support, I say, what should they be credited for? Is it the chewing the meat down to the bone, or the going to the fund for support to cure your own chewing of the meat down to the bone? And that it would be ridiculous for anybody to, on his own, chew the meat down to the bone, go to the fund for support, and say he should be applauded.
So are you
for going to
suggesting
the
that
fund?
President Mahama was self-incriminating when he said we chew the meat to the bone and therefore had to go to IMF?
I think he was self-incriminating when he said that his administration's economic management program, or let me say their fiscal policy and monetary policy, had led to a chewing of the meat down to the bone, and therefore they had gone to the fund and asked for support. And that is my answer to that question.
I don't think that's a fair comment or fair response, because...
Well, as for fairness and unfairness, you're allowed to have that view.
The implication of what you said...
You're allowed to have that... You're allowed to have that view.
The implication of what most... Okay, at least my understanding of when I listened to the audio was that you're basically saying, if you mismanage the economy to which chew the meat to the bones, you will end up with the IMF.
No, please. That is not...
No, I'm saying that's the impression I got from that statement. That's what many people get as well.
No, that's your impression. I also say to you that that's an unfair categorization of it. The understanding of it is that if you mismanage the economy and go for a bailout and ask that you be credited for the stability that comes from the bailout, you oughtn't, let me use your own expression, you oughtn't get that credit. Now, bring that fast forward into where we are now. Why have we gone for a bailout? We have not gone for a bailout.
Because you've mismanaged the economy.
No, we have not gone for a bailout because we've mismanaged the economy. We have gone for a bailout because...
you have. No, because all the data indicators from your debt to GDP levels, your inflation rate, your deficit rate are worse than they were during Mohammed's time.
So what induced them? That's the question we have to ask. So let me give you an answer. We are going for an IMF program because the twin crisis, first of COVID and now of Ukraine, have imposed an unprecedented demand on our fiscal and monetary policies to respond. But it comes at a time when the buffers that we had built between 2017 and 2019 have been eroded by the very first crisis. Look at the performance of the Ghanaian economy between 2017 and 2019. The Ghanaian economy still had its own peculiar challenges. Nobody can run away from that. But the Ghanaian economy was performing comparatively better year on year between 2017 and 2019 until we were hit in 2020. And when we were hit first in 2020, that's when you saw the first set of major, may I say, macro distortions happening. That's when you saw the rate of debt accumulation going back up. That's when you saw debt to GDP ratio, which you just mentioned, going back up. That's when you began to see our debt build up in such a significant manner. Prior to that, yes, debt was building up, but was not building up at the same rate at which you saw in 2020. In 2021, as we started the exercise of recovery, we were hopeful that by the time we were ending that year and commencing a 2022 rebuild, using our own domestic resource mobilization strategies, better managing our debt, trying to rationalize our expenses, we could contain the situation. This domestic strategy is what I'm submitting to you this morning, has been challenged. And as a result of this challenge, the president looks at the total picture and says,
so you seriously want Ghanaians to believe that the only reason we are going to the IMF is because of COVID-19?
No, that's a primary reason. We're going through a conversation.
COVID-19 was a global crisis.
Yes, it was, and that is why.
Give me a second. I have in front of me data for Cote d'Ivoire compared to Ghana, because Cote d'Ivoire has been a very good example you've used. Indeed, Dr. Bawumia used Cote d'Ivoire in a recent speech where he said the NDC administration blames Cote d'Ivoire as if the global economic challenges affected only Ghana. Check out Cote d'Ivoire's growth. Look at the time series. The only effect on COVID was minus 1.8 in July 2020. Now, I'll show you the same thing for Ghana.
Can I respond to Cote d'Ivoire?
Hold on. I'll show you the same thing for Ghana. Look at Ghana. 2 quarters of negative growth.
Yeah.
Now, let's do inflation. Our inflation, average inflation, Cote d'Ivoire's inflation is less than 10%.
Yeah.
Our inflation is near 30%.
Now,
we can use deficit, even within the period of the same data. All the, even deficits, growth rates, on every measure, they do far better than us.
Because the Cote d'Ivoire...
And I'm using them because we are similar economies. We are both cocoa exporting. Even we have gold, they don't. Yeah. We have more oil than they do. So they are very comparable economies.
Yeah. Well, but what is the GDP of Cote d'Ivoire? What is the reserve position of Cote d'Ivoire? Today, I'm sure you're aware that Cote d'Ivoire has applied for an IMF program. You're aware?
We know over 40 countries have applied for IMF programs.
Actually, about 100 countries have applied for it. Cote d'Ivoire, that you are citing as an example, with all of these numbers you are talking about, why have they applied?
But there are different IMF programs.
Well,
and the basis for applying for the IMF program is so it's not about applying for an IMF program.
No. So check it out, and then let's find out what they have applied for, what Ghana is looking to get. Kenya, with all the macro stability that the Kenyan economy has and the robustness of the Kenyan economy, they have applied for it. Egypt has applied for it. Tunisia has just started the conversations. So we can do the comparatives. But I want to go back to why Ghana has gone. The primary reason, as I've explained to you, is that the twin crisis, as I've explained, and it's a matter that is well known. But beyond the general point of the twin crisis, our domestic program, as I mentioned, which was ordinarily what would have helped us respond without going for a balance of payment support program, has also been challenged. And I've given you examples of, for example, how it's taken 4 months to get revenue measures through, and even when they got through, they are yet to hit optimal level. But one of the major things that has affected us is our downgrade. Is our downgrade and therefore our inability to access the international capital markets. Because if you could, on an ordinary basis, access the international capital markets, what would have happened is that by this time, after budget had been read, you'd have been able to mop in some hard currency, which would ensure that even if for whatever reason, domestic production and export and balance of trade and balance of payment was therefore not happening at the rate at which you want it to happen, you will still be able to mop in some forex to service, in particular, your international debt obligations, to hold your currency, and then it will also provide some liquidity for parts of your fiscal program.
Yeah, but could you, we were not downgraded. we were downgraded for a series of reasons.
Yes.
So it is now who caused some?
Well,
that's the question.
So let's go through the now who caused some. One of the reasons for which we've been downgraded, I'm not saying it's the only reason. One of the reasons for which we've been downgraded is the fact that in 2020 we took on a lot of debt as part of our COVID management program. And what it did was that it made debt sustainability hit the roof. If you read, I was reading I think it was Moody's that did the downgrade. If you read the report, one of the things it talks about is the escalated debt, which escalated debt was most pronounced in 2020. Another thing it says, and it says it in very fine language, but if you interrogate it, it's the same thing, talks about some of the governance pitfalls that we're beginning to experience in Parliament. If you speak to the international investors, they'll tell you that those fights in Parliament, that kind of posture that demonstrates our inability to get economic policy through will not give confidence to any investor to put money in the Ghanaian economy. So there are things that we do that we think, it's just politicking, but they all have an effect on it. Today, for example, as I'm saying, we have $1 billion at the doorsteps of Parliament, even in the midst of all of this, which we honestly, in all humility, believe we have to mop into the central treasury so that our city doesn't depreciate any further. We have reserves to meet our international obligations. We are facing the same kind of obstruction. Now, when that happens, and you are therefore not able to mop in the forex that you require, the president would have to take the responsible decision of what do I do to ensure that the situation does not degenerate. And that's the situation that the president has had to take.
This is the City Breakfast Show. It's 8:36. We apologize we can't bring you your money. My guest, Kojo Oponkroma.
Well, this is your money.
Okay, that's a good one.
This is your money.
This is your money. So your money essentially manage your economy in a way that would not lead you into trouble. There are lots of contentious issues, and we don't have all day. But I still want to push back on some of the points you made.
That's fine.
Because we've checked West Africa data statistics, and our fiscal situation is much worse than a lot of our comparator countries.
That is true.
You've said that we had to borrow a lot during COVID. That is correct, but the level of Ghana's debt accumulation is higher than the emerging market average. In fact, when we go to the IMF website and check the level, by the projected debt to GDP is going to be 83%, which is much higher than almost all comparator countries. Now, a lot of Ghanaians will say, so if you borrowed so much even within COVID, what have we used the money for? For which reason some of the other indicators like inflation, people's incomes and things have not improved? Because if you've borrowed that much, then Ghanaians should be saying, okay, no problem. You decided to borrow a lot during COVID to help us. How come, as we speak this morning, we have a higher fuel price? The cedi to the dollar rate is near to 8 cedis. Inflation is close to 30%. So a country that borrows so much within the COVID period, citizens are still reeling. And they compare, again, during the demonstration, they compared, for example, fuel prices in the comparator countries, Burkina Faso, Togo, Nigeria, right? So how do you explain to Ghanaians that this is not mismanagement?
You have to give me some latitude to deal with this. First, you've said that our fiscal situation is worse than that of many of the comparator countries. And you are right. And that's exactly what we have been saying. One of the first things you want to look at is a comparison of revenue mobilization in all of these countries that you are looking for. Ghana has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios in the West African sub-region. If we are comparing the ability of other governments to respond to some of the challenges you've spoken about, inflation, fuel pricing, etc., their ability to respond is primarily through their fiscal program. So you have countries in which, through their fiscal program, they can lend a helping hand. We live in a country where tax to GDP ratio is what? Somewhere around 12% thereabout. OECD countries are supposed to be doing about 25%. It's not that the GDP is not being produced. It is being produced, but how much of it comes back to the national kitty or to the treasury to enable the administration of the day, be it NDC, MPP, PPP, whoever, respond to some of these concerns? Two, if you take something like inflation, the inflation that we're experiencing currently is a pass-through of about three things. One, deregulation policy, which is therefore ensuring that the crude oil prices on the world market are literally translating into what you are seeing on the Ghanaian market. Last week, Monday, when we started the engagements, we met market women, we met transport operators. And they started off by arguing that, listen, if I go to Domahinkro, Burkina Faso and buy tomatoes, and it costs me X to transport it, Y to load it, Z to unload it, I've got to pass all of that on because it's a deregulated market I'm running. The fuel operators say if fuel price was $74 per barrel in December last year, and it is $133 per barrel at the end of, I think, March or April or so, literally doubled, they will also have to pass it through. Unless, the first point you raised, the fiscal situation is such that a government can dip into it and provide some reliefs. You were talking this morning about the fact that while we were all expecting prices to perhaps come down a little bit from this weekend into this week, they've actually gone up. When I checked from the National Petroleum Authority, they say the three margins that were suspended, the only one that has been brought back is the UPPF margin. What is the UPPF margin? It's the Unified Petroleum Pricing Fund margin. What is that fund? That fund is the fund that ensures that when somebody buys fuel in Buipe, the price is not different from if he buys it at Tema, because the transporters may add their own prices to it if you don't have a way of having a fund that pays them. In the 3 months that it was suspended, every month we lost 40 million. 40 million Ghana cedis. Multiplied by 3, that's about what? About 120? About 120 million. And so when the 3 month comes to an end, unless it is reviewed, MP is working with its instructions. So fuel pricing on the Ghanaian market is gone up because of the type of deregulated policy you are operating. You want to check some of the other countries you are raising as comparatives. What is the policy they are operating? So not just a question of what is their fiscal framework that allows them to intervene, but also what is the policy that they are operating.
Hold on with that point. Which is why Ghanaians are legitimately unhappy, because you are running a deregulated system. It means at the end of the day, we pay. Okay. You, according to Finance Minister, got about 18 billion during the COVID period, from whether it's for the IMF's 1 billion or whatever amount. You raised about 18 billion cedis to support COVID. You are passing through fuel prices to us. You are not increasing our salaries. Inflation is eating away our salaries. So, and my point, my pushback to you is that this is clearly your fault.
No, you raised 3 issues first. Fiscal situation, then you talked about fuel, then you talked about 30% inflation.
Yeah.
I want to land on the 30% and then I'll come to this new question you have added to it. The 30% inflation, check what the Ghana Statistical Service is saying is causing it. It is primarily the effect of this fuel pricing matter that we have spoken about, which is now affecting transportation prices, which is affecting everything.
Which your policy has caused.
It is the national policy we've been operating. Unless you, Bernard, are telling me that we should now move from a deregulated fuel system into a regulated one.
But there are 7 tax components you can do something about.
What is the total tax?
Probably 24%.
And therefore, if you compare that to 100% increase in fuel prices, if you took away all the taxes today, because even the example of the margins that were taken away, just now extrapolate it. If you took away all the taxes today, will the price of petroleum products on the market necessarily come down? The answer is no.
It will be much lower than it is.
Well, of course, it will be lower than it is.
Yes.
But it will be higher than when it was at 74%.
Yes, but people
now that is the benefit. I'm coming. If I may land with my answer.
If 24% of the tax build up is I'm just making a point. If 24%
I know, but let me respond to the question you have asked.
No, because you are putting something to me.
No, but let me respond to the question you have asked. Let me respond to the question you have asked. It's a cost-benefit analysis. On one breath, if you take away, let's say, the taxes on it, which you are saying is 24%, if you take it away, the benefit that the average Ghanaian is expecting is that at least fuel prices will be halted where they are or will not go up any further.
Relief.
The reality on the market, and by the way, that suggestion is still, may I say, at large. We have this weekend coming up to look at the consequential measures that will go into media. So I'm not saying it cannot happen, but I'm saying the analysis so far is that the benefit you are expecting, which is perhaps a halt in the further escalation of fuel prices as compared to the cost. What is the cost if you take away these taxes? Already today you are in a scenario where the little that is coming into the treasury is not able to meet the expenditure commitments that as a country we have. Last night I was talking to national service persons, some of who are saying that our allowances have delayed. I was talking to teachers who were raising issues with some of their compensation, etc. Even this one that the fiscal framework is struggling to contain is what you get from all of these taxes, etc. on it. If you do further cuts in these taxes, the argument so far has been that it would significantly limit your ability to deliver on the little that you are struggling to deliver on. So it's a cost and benefit matter here. One of the things we need to focus on significantly, which I think very often we run away from, is going back to improve domestic resource mobilization. Because, Bernard, even this IMF BOP thing that you are going for, even if it's concessional, in the end, you need domestic resources to go and pay it back.
Let's talk about the fiscal issue. So you're talking about we don't pay enough taxes. It really depends on what kind of tax. Yes, our direct taxes are lower than average. Ghana's indirect taxes are very high and very, very comparable to all peers. That's point number one. Point number two, the kind of tax you push talks about your mindset toward the economy. You have not put in place the infrastructure to collect property tax, as an example. You have not passed the tax exemptions bill into law, which a lot of people feel wastes a lot of money for us. Property tax is a progressive tax.
Yep.
You've been in power for 5 years. So if you come around and tell me don't mobilize enough tax revenue, and yet you have done precious little about property tax, you haven't passed the tax exemption bill, you've been in 2 parliaments, that cannot be the fault of the ordinary Ghanaian. Then you talk about spending. This sounds like a very may not be related. But what signal do you send to Ghanaians if you make payments for building a cathedral? Possibly outside budget, because we haven't seen the details of the line items in the budget within a period of difficult economic times.
Yeah.
How do you expect Ghanaians to come and understand it when you say you are making a trade-off between them paying tax versus like getting revenue to develop and fuel prices and all of that? Your decisions seem to have worsened the plight of the Ghanaian.
So let me speak to the issue of tax exemptions. The tax exemptions bill has now been worked on by Finance Committee. We're expecting the plenary to work on it and to pass it. But some truth must be spoken about the tax exemption bill. When, as a country, traditionally your domestic resource mobilization is low, and consequently, you still have to do some projects. So let's say you go to African Development Bank and ask for $200 million to do a Pokwasi interchange. And on top of that $200 million you have borrowed, you say you want to take taxes on it, then your cost of borrowing is going to go up higher. So when you then give an exemption on the taxes on the project for which you have borrowed, somebody can look at it and say, oh, that's tax exemption, you've lost X amount of money. But actually, it's a plus and minus. It's the value is the same.
The devil is in the detail.
If you did not give that tax exemption, the cost of the project and consequently the cost of the loan will be higher, and your debt servicing obligations, etc. But it is being worked on. It's past committee stage. We're expecting the plenary to work on it. Property taxes, for example, we found out that, listen, you need to have a more, may I say, technology-supported approach. That is what is now being rolled out in collaboration with the Ghana Revenue Authority.
It's been 5 years.
I agree with anybody. No, I mean, I agree. We could have done better on, for example, putting property tax mechanisms in place earlier. But I think we should not run away from the fact that the revenue mobilization conversation in this country is one that we have all been shying away from. I'm not saying necessarily more taxes, but the compliance to the already existent, for example, direct taxes. It has taken us quite a while to now get national ID done so that you now sync it with your tax database and begin to realize who is in the Ghanaian economy, who is making money, who is not paying taxes, and who you can then engage to be able to bring some more taxes to the table. And I think no matter what we do, it is part of the conversation that we need to confront head on. Because if we don't, we'll run away in circles for a very long time.
You had 18 billion. I'm still on fiscal. You had 18 billion for COVID.
Yeah.
For the past 7 years, we haven't increased the amount we pay for LEAP. So the average LEAP family gets 32 cedis a month, which is 1 cedi a day since 2015. You raised 18 billion, some of which came through an IMF program, or an IMF money were entitled to 1 billion.
Yeah.
Still, your LEAP has not increased, which is possibly the most well-targeted. In fact, the World Bank says the LEAP is the best targeted social intervention program. This is the World Bank's view, and we cannot argue with that. We can't, but not for here.
Yeah.
So if you raise 18 billion, you haven't even increased LEAP by 1 peso, and you are spending money on things that many people consider unnecessary. How then do you come back and say that it's not your fault? Because I'm coming back to the fiscal issue.
Let me deal with the 18
I'm coming back
billion.
to the fiscal issue.
Let me deal with the 18 billion. So with respect, the 18 billion that was raised was not raised to increase LEAP.
That's not what I'm saying.
No, I'm saying, no, you kept...
It was raised...
No,
you don't misconstrue me.
No, I'm not. You kept... Can I explain to you my understanding of what you've... Earlier, you were telling me about your understanding.
So LEAP is an example of a social intervention program.
Yes, but the 18 billion that was raised was not raised with the objective.
So what was it spent for?
Well, it was spent on the COVID response program. The details, I don't have them before me, but the finance minister outlined them in Parliament, and the speaker has asked the joint committees of finance and health to go through the details. If by the time they are done with the details, you found anything there that is untoward or out of order,
which includes cooking, food for people and all of that.
Yeah, I'm sure we can raise
but
that.
we can deal with that because
I'm sure we can raise that. So I just want to make the point.
No, just hold on.
Let me make the point. You asked the question. Let me make the point.
No, I just want to explain that. My point is that if you have an emergency and you raise 18 billion, you've spent it on spraying, cooking for people and all of that.
Medical bills of persons who were affected by COVID, infrastructure for some of the health institutions to help us to respond to COVID, etc., etc. All of that is part of it. I'm saying that as they go through the assessment of the numbers that have been provided by the finance minister, if we find anything untoward there, we can go after it. But it will not derogate from the... Listen, if you have a 400 billion cedi problem, you need to raise revenue, let's say, of about 400 billion to be able to meet the obligations. And you are doing, 150. You can have a conversation about the proprietary nature of the application of some 5 out of the 150, and that's a fair conversation to have. And if anybody has misapplied, let's say, some 1 million, go after him. But Bernard, in all humility, it will not take away the fact that you need to come back and confront that gap between the 150 and the 400. You can go for support, go for help, do a few things here, but you need to come back and confront that conversation about how do I move from 150 to 400.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying that
my obligations.
If you have a financing gap, irrespective of what happens, so let's assume you have a financing gap of 10 million.
Yeah.
That matter must be dealt with irrespective of what you spend the little you have on.
Yes.
Because the financing gap is the bigger problem. That is true.
Yeah.
But some would also say the way you manage the little you have
that is true.
Will determine whether you will even get.
That is true.
Because we are the ones paying.
That is very true.
So if we feel you are mismanaging the little you get,
that is very
the impetus to pay more to fill the gap will not come.
That is very true. But those conversations, I say to you in all humility, must go side by side. Because in this country, we have adequate mechanisms for dealing with how that 150 has been used. I always make the point that, for example, you cannot procure without going through a procurement process established by law in this country. You have to make a justification at various levels before you procure. You need commencement certificates. Another team of people have to see it, do their feasibility, etc., before they give you the right to procure. When you procure, there are processes for ensuring that you pay. When you are done with it, there's an auditor general who will come and audit and ensure that it's in line with what should have taken place. if across this value chain anything has gone wrong, there's a whole process for dealing with it.
Can we deal with just a few?
But I'm just saying, if I just may
okay,
land, I'm just saying that while that process exists, let's not reduce the entire conversation to there's some 5 million in the 150 that I have a problem with. Therefore, I don't want to deal with moving from 150 to 400. When in reality, we have to move to 400 to deal with issues.
That's a fair point. But I still feel that because the citizenry must be involved in raising that revenue, the way government is perceived to spend money is very important as a signal.
That is true.
Which is why I come to an issue like the cathedral.
Yeah.
How do you justify the amounts we spent on a cathedral at the time we did?
This whole cathedral matter, I think, has generated a lot of public brouhaha. I have honestly asked for a full brief to understand why we paid what at what point in time. So as I sit before you this morning, I don't have a full brief to enable me to speak to that matter. Our understanding initially is that it was supposed to be put together by the churches and the private sector with some seed support from the state. I don't have a full brief on the details of how that has gone. So I'm not going to go into that matter. The brief I have this morning, which is what I'm speaking to, is a broader conversation of how we are getting ourselves out of the economic doldrums in which we find ourselves. The option the president has opened that we speak to the fund to get some support in implementing our program, and how we should look to ensuring that in implementing that program, we will do it in such a manner that it just doesn't get us out of our balance of payment quagmire in which we are today, but it puts us in a situation where the major structural problems of the Ghanaian economy can be dealt with moving forward.
Help us with the posture government is taking to the meeting. And I'm asking this because I recall when we spoke in March, before Finance Minister came up with this announcement, we had the impression some of our social programs, which many people considered too expensive, were on the table for discussion.
Yeah.
Subsequently, when Minister came to Parliament, he says, no, we will not. In fact, he zeroed in on free SHS.
Says it will not be cancelled.
At all.
Yeah.
But so what is with you going back to this conversation, IMF, is that still the position that free SHS is it's off the table?
So you see, when you say it's off the table, what do you mean?
Is it up for discussion for streamlining?
So up for discussion for streamlining will not mean cancelling.
Okay.
I think that sometimes words and concepts and their understanding, people, when you say, let's say, it is fair to have a look or to examine, I think the word I used was to examine, people interpret it to mean that, it's going to be cut. That's not what we are saying. I have said, and I maintain, because it is what the president has said, that you have to look at all your expenditure items and examine which one can you still fully deliver, but perhaps at a lower cost. The fact that it is up for examination, with the greatest of respect, does not mean cancellation. So, you have a scenario where you have a number of social protection programs that you have rolled out as an administration. And as you're going into this fund program and you're also looking at the necessary expenditure rationalization measures, you're going to be asking yourselves, which one can you still deliver without necessarily spending as much as you had initially budgeted for? If push comes to shove and you have to consider which ones you may not be able to go forward with, all of that is fair to consider.
Okay.
It's early days. We are now going into these negotiations. It may not be wise to start drawing the line down that, no, this one will not be affected, that one. But I think we must go into it with the mindset that the administration is minded to, as much as possible, protect what matters to the Ghanaian people. A lot of people are worried that what matters to them, public sector employment, some of the programs like the free senior high school program, will be truncated. I think if the evidence of the recent past is anything to go by, we are minded to negotiate in a manner that seeks to protect what is in the best interest of the Ghanaian people. The programs that will ensure that people get jobs, people get incomes, they can improve their quality of life. As much as possible, they can get relief from the pressures that Russia, Ukraine, COVID, and the challenges to our domestic program are imposing on us. That is the framework, the mindset with which we are going into these negotiations.
Usually and this is from previous history, you would notice there would be definitely calls for rationalization, whether it's of wages or in terms of employment
Yeah.
or of some subsidy program.
Yeah.
So that's the way IMF works.
Yes.
So there are many angles. Some are looking at size of government. Some are looking at government flagships.
Yeah.
And then some are looking at infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
So again, I'm coming back to the mindset, because from what you are saying is the president who sets the tone.
Yeah.
And from the listening to the president, it's quite clear that when he was asked about the size of his government, he says the size of his government will deliver.
Yeah.
So he didn't think it was such a big problem.
Yeah.
His social policy interventions, he also seems quite strong in his head that they will work. So I'm just wondering what sort of concessions, because you don't forget your statement says you will present a statement, so you will present a program to the IMF at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's not like IMF will tell you, they will suggest, but you will decide.
Yeah.
So if you are not going to reduce size of government, if you are not going to touch some of your key or stop some of your key flagships, then where will the space come from?
I think it's early days. I think we should give the team that is doing this. First of all, the task force is chaired by the president. His fiscal policy manager and his team are bringing the necessary proposals to the table. The president has set the framework, similar to the words that you have described, that there are things that must be protected, but we do understand that there will need to be some rationalization measures. So it's a balancing act between the two. How do you ensure that the most important things are protected while at the same time ensuring that that rationalization takes place? It's a balancing act in the middle. Let's give the team the opportunity to do the work, bring it to the president, let him have an opportunity to sign off on all. In fact, the first part of the engagement with the IMF is to look at the data to determine which kind of program will work for Ghana. Because like we mentioned, the IMF has several programs. So as they are coming to town from about Wednesday, what we're going to do is to share all the data and then come to a certain understanding. Is it an ECF we are going for? Is it a standby facility? What is it? By that time, when we are done on that one and we begin to negotiate the details, President will also have signed off on the details of what sort of balancing act we want to achieve. And we can have that conversation.
Let me just end with a lot of people are asking me to ask you if government doesn't owe Ghanaians an apology.
I don't think it. In fact, last night your colleague MFA of Joy News asked me the same question. I don't think it's about apology or no apology, or this one has done this or that. I think it's about dealing with the realities of the situation in front of us. The realities of the situation in front of us are that we have a twin crisis that has exacerbated our domestic challenges. The domestic program, which should have enabled us to deal with it, has had its own challenges. The president has instructed his team to open a window and start engagement with the fund. Let's give ourselves the opportunity to go through and arrive at a program that delivers best for the people of Ghana. I think what will happen is that at the end of the day, if we are successful in putting a good program on the table, executing it, exiting it like we've done in the recent past, and in delivering what is most important to the people of Ghana, a good chunk of this, posturing.
So when people say that the way politicians play political football with the economy, it erodes their own credibility, because if you've made, for someone like finance minister, if you've made a principled stance that the IMF program will not be good for us, should you not resign, or should you be the one to lead us to negotiate with them? Based on a question of principle, is that not legitimate?
I think it's a fair question to ask. The answer I have provided already, that the minister responsible for fiscal policy, the minister responsible for finance, has expressed a view supported by the government's view, that it is better to use domestic measures to deal with some of these challenges than to find yourself in a situation where you need external help of this nature. Unfortunately, the domestic measures have been challenged. At the time they have been challenged, there's a twin global crisis that is biting hard. Any president who feels the pain of his people would explore what options work best. And this is the window that the president has asked us to open and engage and ensure that we're able to find the necessary resources to deal with the short-term problem, but also at the same time deal with the bigger economic problem.
But is there not a fear in government? Is there not a fear in government that the position of the finance minister weakens us before IMF? Because if you have...
The president chairs the task force, as I've told you. The minister and his team are putting their details together. They will come back to the task force the president chairs. And the president is responsible for economic policy. I think sometimes we think that the finance minister is responsible for the economy. The finance minister actually is responsible for fiscal policy. The Bank of Ghana is responsible for monetary policy. Real sector development, broader economic policy sits with the president. He has an economic management team under him that will be doing the day-to-day management. The president is in full control of the end-of-day engagements that we'll have with the fund. The president is the one who spoke to the fund managing director on the phone.
But what we know about these engagements and the details are that they would typically work with the president and typically for all these programs. For the details, it's the finance minister and the vice president.
No, based on the framework and the objectives as agreed between the president of the republic and the
so
managing director of the fund. No, but that's how it works. In fact, if you speak to any of these people, they'll tell you that the first thing that will happen is that the president of the republic would have to call the managing director and have a conversation that, listen, X, Y, Z, and this is what I'm asking my people to do. This is a broad framework within which I want my people to do the detailed negotiations with your people. I mean, I'm privy to the conversation between the president and the managing director, and she expressed what, she thought was the appropriate posture that the government of Ghana had taken, and explained how, as I mentioned earlier, about 100 countries across the world, in Africa, Kenya, Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire that you refer to, Ethiopia, Morocco, Tunisia is just also trying to get a new facility, have all requested for facilities.
And Togo also there?
I don't have an indication that they are.
What about Senegal?
But these are some of the big economies in Africa that we are talking about, that sometimes even when we compare ourselves to, we say they are doing better than us. And the managing director expressed the fact that, it makes sense that all of these ones at this point will take this option. What is before us now is to tap into that option to do the temporary work we need to do. But Bernard, there are bigger problems in the Ghanaian economy. If I just may land
on that. And when you are doing that, the timeline, people are wondering how soon.
Typically, it takes about 6 months to 9 months to agree
the program to be agreed on
a program.
My God.
And then you have your prior actions that you have to follow.
Wow.
You know, the last one, it took 7 months to negotiate. Average is usually about 6 months. We are hoping we can do it a bit faster.
So probably January.
Well, we are hoping we can do it a bit faster, but we need to sit with them from Wednesday and have that conversation. But Bernard, when you are done with all of this, one of the bigger challenges in the Ghanaian economy, which is finding resources to better stimulate industry, to produce more, export more, bring the reserves back into the treasury so that your dollar or your forex earning power is higher than your forex spending, so that without requiring some balance of payment support, you can have enough reserves to deal with your currency issues, is something we still have to confront. That will not be dealt with by the IMF.
But where is that difficulty coming from, considering you've borrowed a lot and pushed it into flagship programs that were supposed to solve that problem you're talking about?
Well, that solution has started. If you look at the 1D1F program, it's not zero. And these factories, these factories, for example, will not in a day turn around the numbers you are looking for. I just saw last week Ekumfi, which is one of the flagship of our flagships, beginning an export program. That is what you are looking for, that you're able to open up the industrial space in this country, like what you've done with Ekumfi, produce a lot more, and like where Ekumfi is now at, about 3 years down the line, export a lot more. But I'm saying not just export a lot more, export and ensure that the foreign exchange end comes back into the jurisdiction.
Okay.
So that you're able to shore up your reserves ordinarily through the normal course of trade and balance of trade and then balance. And then you have a situation where the pressure on your currency, forex liquidity, and how it even enables the fiscal managers to support the economy.
I just wanted to make a point that what I know about IMF and Cote d'Ivoire is that they finished Article 4 consultations, and Article 4 is not necessarily an approach to the IMF for a bailout. In fact, if you read and this is June 17.
Actually, there's a June 22nd as well.
Okay, so the update from the IMF on Cote d'Ivoire is not similar to Ghana, which is the point I was trying to make to you. So
no, the data is not similar.
I'm coming.
Yes.
The Ivorian economy proved resilient to COVID, thanks to the authorities' effective policy response and recovery strongly in 2021, with growth expected at 7%. The impact of war on Ukraine and regional security challenges are expected to weigh in on the macroeconomic outlook. The medium-term growth outlook remains robust. A resolute implementation of reforms under 2021-25 National Development Plan would boost medium-term growth. So this was based on an Article 4 visit, which is more like a regular
membership. And Ghana goes through its Article 4 visits on a regular basis.
I'm just saying that the difference between that And what we have called them to come for a special program.
Okay.
So it's not the same.
No. I'm not saying that the Ghanaian and the Ivorian economies are the same. I agree with you that our numbers don't look the same. But I'm explaining to you the kind of impact that these global crises have had on these economies and how we are responding.
Yeah, I know, but you said that because Cote d'Ivoire has gone to IMF, we've also gone to... And I'm saying that
I'm not talking about their Article 4 consultations. My understanding, the data I have is that Cote d'Ivoire is in the process of asking for an IMF facility. So is Tunisia. Okay, and those are the countries I have referred to, Kenya and Egypt as well.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Kojo Ponkroma is the Minister for Information, MV for Fwasi Ayrebi. He signed the statement, and I guess there's going to be a lot of busyness between now and December.
That's the kind of statement that when you're signing, your hand is shaking.
All right, we'll be right back with more. A group of civil society organizations are not happy. They are holding a press conference today at 10 o'clock.
What about?
I'll tell you, quite a number of them say the economy is hard, things are not going well, they are not happy with the government.